Hi, everyone. My name is Melanie Langer, and I'm a social psychologist and consultant. I'm here to talk today about the relationship between Carrie and Big and Carrie and Aidan on the show Sex and the City. I'm doing this to present an alternative account of people's motivations, largely based on attachment theory, but probably not the part of it that you have heard about or read about in pop psych articles or books. And I'll also be drawing on my research and experience in other with the other theoretical orientations to inform the discussion that we're having today. So, for anyone who hasn't seen the series in a while, the rough outline of these relationships in terms of their events is that Carrie dates Big. He won't commit to her. She breaks up with him. She starts dating Aidan. She tells us, the audience and her friends, that Aidan is too available and that she misses the chase. And that's pretty much the way that people tend to talk about those two relationships, and is also a really common way for people to talk about their interest or lack of interest in their own romantic partners or potential partners. So she dates Aidan. Eventually, she and Aidan, who are in a monogamous relationship, she cheats on Aidan with Big. She and Aidan split up. They get back together. She's already ended the affair with Big. And eventually, Aidan asks Carrie to marry her. She very hesitatingly says yes. And ultimately, they break up. They don't get married. And then at the end of the series, spoiler alert, we see that Carrie and Big get back together after Big realizes that he wants to commit to Carrie, and that she is the person that he wants to commit to, and that he wants to commit to someone. In the first movie, we see them nearly get married, but as that goes from the plan of having a small ceremony to a bigger one that is really driven by Carrie and by lots of offers that she's getting to wear, a more fabulous wedding gown, etc. He can't reach her to talk about the distress that he's feeling and been bottling up about the changes to their wedding. She doesn't get the call, and he ends up leaving her, not at, but just before the altar. And they break up again. By the end of the first movie, we see them get back together. They get married after all at a small ceremony. And then in the second movie, we see them, it's the first time that we see them without this element of chase or pursuit in their relationship. At this point, they are married and living together. And the movie centers for them on their decision not to have children, their preference not to have children, and the way that's regarded by other people, and the way what they feel it means for decisions that they have to make about how they're going to live their lives and what they need to get from each other in order for that to be satisfying, which Carrie seems to be having more trouble adjusting to than Big, potentially. And sort of incidentally, she runs into Aidan and ends up kissing him. Although both agree that it was unintentional, they got caught up in the moment. It doesn't mean anything. She tells Big, and they kind of move on from there. And in the second movie, there's also a lot of conflict. The conflict between Carrie and Big is symbolized by the television that Big buys as supposedly as or either allegedly or it was his intention for it to be a present for Carrie, I think on their anniversary. And they had a nice time in an inn watching TV together when it felt romantic, and they were watching old movies. But he starts using it to watch shows that only he is interested in their bedroom, when it was supposed to be a gift for Carrie and a way for them to connect, and kind of one of the activities that they could do that doesn't involve things that they associate with kind of early romance, like having wild sex, although obviously that's not something that can only exist in the early days of a romance. And neither is it having children, which they're not planning to do. And so the way that tool to allow them to access this kind of, alternative to either of those two, not exactly lifestyles, but kind of other activities in life, the way that the TV fails to be that for them, is kind of symbolic of an emblem of their struggle to find that in their lives, and to kind of settle into a life together that works for both of them, and that is significant, that is sufficiently comforting and sufficiently stimulating for them to feel like it's enjoyable and sustainable in the long term. So that's the overview. I'm now going to talk about the kind of traditional way of understanding what's going on here and why she ends up with Big as opposed to Aidan, and then alternatives to that. So as I mentioned earlier, the dominant narrative or explanation of why she ends up with Big, why she wants to be with Big in the first place, and why she doesn't want to be with Aidan, is that Big is hard to get and Aidan is too easy to get, and that people enjoy the chase, and that's something that we hear a lot. We also hear a lot that people want what's bad for them. We're attracted to the bad boy or the bad girl, or bad non-binary individual, and that people enjoy basically being rejected. I, based on what I've read and my work, don't think that that's true, although it certainly looks like what's going on, and is related to what's going on. So I think there's another factor that we often fail to consider in relationships, and that is just straight up compatibility. I think as we've moved away as a culture, which is a great thing, from thinking that there are certain particularly demographic characteristics like race or socioeconomic status, or religion, that are kind of deal breakers or deal makers, we have kind of failed to substitute that with a more nuanced and accurate understanding of shared interests and shared, and sort of the importance of shared or compatible interests and constraints, sort of circumstances that you're working with in your life that you can't or don't want to change, and as well as the dynamic that we have with our partners. We focus a lot on the dynamic. We talk about things like being resistant to commitment, or being insecure and needing a lot of reassurance, and whether those two things work with one's partner. But we don't talk as much about actual shared interests. So when I was having a conversation about this with my best friend and her father, who is obviously older, and kind of very logical thinking lawyer, we were talking about dating apps and how someone had listed something about kayaking on their profile. And we were, at the time, this was years ago, lamenting that dating apps didn't ask more sort of relevant, dynamic-oriented questions. And whether or not you share an interest in kayaking with someone is not going to make or break a relationship. And her dad, I thought, very astutely said, well, it depends on how much you like to kayak. And I thought that was a great point. So I think that we don't get a chance to really see what kind of compatibility exists between Big and Carrie until the second movie, because that's when the pursuit and withdrawal dynamic, that chase, that element is controlled for, as in it doesn't exist because they're already married and psychologically they've committed to each other, and that's not the conflict that we're seeing between them. And it allows us to see other conflicts that may have existed the entire time, but were concealed by this other more salient conflict that they were having around whether or not to be committed to one another, and to what degree. So we see I think based on what we see in the second movie, it shifts the perspective on what we've seen thus far. So when we think about Aidan, it's not so much, I would say, that he is too available, but rather the fact that he's available makes their incompatibility visible. It more quickly erodes the possibility of Carrie looking at him and imagining him to be, some kind of perfect match for her. Even in terms of the things that we learn about him very early on, like that he's a furniture maker. Obviously, Carrie's aware of that from the time that they get together. But the fact that he isn't hiding any information from her or pulling away with the result that she doesn't have access to that information, that she can't see it. He's just accessible, and he's letting her into all the parts of his life so that she can really see what those things mean on a day-to-day basis. That means that she can learn early that, well, maybe she finds it sexy in theory that he makes furniture. In practice, she does appreciate aesthetics and, quality fabrication, but she isn't particularly interested in furniture. She's not even interested in it from an interior design perspective. She's really focused on fashion. We see that he loves the outdoors. She says that the name of the town where his cabin is, Suffern, is appropriate because of how much she suffers when she's there. And this is something that makes him, that place and being in upstate New York makes him really happy. So the fact that she's miserable, doing something that he loves to do and that he enjoys spending a lot of time doing is a real point of incompatibility between them, and against the relationship. And as I said, obviously people's desires don't have to be the same, but hopefully your partner is someone who, facilitates your living a happier and more complete and authentic life. And if you're constantly pulling each other in opposite directions and what is good for you is bad for your partner, that's going to wear on the relationship. So I think what ends up happening with Carrie, I think her relationship with Aidan is a really great example of the kind of relationship that is wonderful to have, especially, maybe after a relationship that's made you realize that there are some things that you might want to examine about how you operate in interpersonal relationships, and that you might want to, think through, rethink some of how you understand yourself and what you want. So I think her relationship with Aidan is great for learning what it's like, for Carrie learning what it's like to be with an open and supportive, loving partner. But that doesn't mean that it's the right relationship for her to stay with. And I don't think that that has anything to do with her being uninterested in someone who would otherwise be a wonderful partner for her, just because he was too available. I think it just helps her to figure it out. And I think what happens in a lot of relationships that take too long to come to a close is that people are frustrated, and they are preoccupied, and they're kind of desperate to, it's really hard to let go of something that sometimes, or maybe often, makes you feel really good and has a lot of benefit for you, when you can't understand why other times it really doesn't work for you or makes you feel terrible. It's much easier to let that go once you've understood. And if someone is hiding that information, if your partner is hiding, whether it's intentional or not, the information that would allow you to understand why you don't work, it's much harder to get there. So this is a good segue into what I think happens between her and Big. I think that from, I think once we see the second movie and we see a little bit more of Big, we even see him in his office, which I don't think we see before, when he gets the call from Carrie about her kiss with Aidan. We get to see that he is, and maybe has even always understood himself to be, a sort of boring workaholic, older white man, who may not, that might not be how Carrie has understood him throughout the series. She is always running into him from the first time that she sees him and that we see them together, that we meet Mr. Big. She sees him out partying, living the kind of life, the kind of New York life that drew Carrie to New York City in the first place. And the series and Carrie make it pretty clear that for her, Mr. Big is the embodiment of New York. So all of what he does in terms of, so Carrie may not have had this information because, like so many other things, Big effectively hid it from her. And usually when people talk about attachment styles and avoidant attachment, in particular in pop psych books, it's usually with reference to avoidantly attached individuals being afraid of or rejecting intimacy. That's sort of I guess that's one way, a popular way to think about it or understand it, but I think it really mischaracterizes both the way the attachment system works and what its function is from an evolutionary perspective, but also what's driving the behavior of avoidantly attached individuals. So, yes, effectively he is avoiding increasing his intimacy with Carrie, or at least his contact with Carrie and her access to different parts of his life. What he's also doing is keeping her out of any part of his life that might reveal their incompatibility, or that might put him in a position to have to ask Carrie for something, as opposed to meeting his own needs through self-reliance, which he does. He's very self-reliant. He unilaterally meets his needs, and he manages his contact with people, with the world. He manages his environment so that he's able to do that. He makes a lot of money so that he can pay for whatever he needs. He doesn't have to rely on other people to give it to him or to work collaboratively. He keeps Carrie and his mother apart. He doesn't let Carrie see his his relationship with religion, whether that's a current relationship or something from his past. He, maybe unwittingly, but essentially he facilitates Carrie's view of him as this person who would be very compatible with her. And so now they have these two problems. They have this lurking incompatibility that is completely unacknowledged and probably known only to Big, because he obviously knows himself. We don't know to what extent he's aware of being concerned about potential incompatibility with Carrie. But we have, at least he has access to his own thoughts and feelings to a certain extent. And he has access to Carrie's thoughts and feelings because she tells him about them all the time. Carrie, on the other hand, is in a very different position. She just has access to her own perspective. So I think that what Big is guilty of is not so much being cruel in terms of not committing to Carrie or being withholding of himself. And I think we all have a right to, not commit to people that we don't want to commit to. But he is messing with her perception of reality, and he is, depriving her of her autonomy in a sense, because you can't make the best decisions for yourself when someone is depriving you of important information that you would use to make those decisions. And then there's the issue of their kind of mismatched dynamic. So where Big seems to probably have an avoidant attachment style, Carrie seems to have an anxious attachment style. So the more that she feels a lack of security, the more she pushes to get that commitment. And she doesn't understand Big's pulling away essentially as a reverse request for, or an indication of a need for help, support, comfort, just as a marker that something is wrong for him, that he's feeling that he can't be close for some reason, that it would lead to some bad outcome. And so in all those moments when he is hesitating, instead of showing him that she can accommodate that, and saying something like, I feel like we're having a really great time together. We seem really compatible to me, but I've noticed that you're kind of keeping your distance. Is there something that I'm missing? Can I, what's going on there? Or, and then maybe offering to help him, support him, meet him halfway, brainstorm with him about how they could overcome some incompatibilities or challenges that he's concerned about. She just pushes him to give her the thing that she wants. And she assumes that his reason for not doing it has to do with her, when it may very well not. So with their first attempt at their wedding, we see this dynamic play out, kind of the biggest we've ever seen, where he's getting increasingly uncomfortable, not sharing information that might threaten the relationship by making her unhappy, or show that he's not a compatible match for her, because he's going to block what she wants and what she needs. So he doesn't say, I'm so happy for you that you're having so much fun with all this wedding planning, but it's actually making me super uncomfortable and also making me feel worried that we're not maybe as compatible as I thought or on the same page if we want wildly different things, or it's making me concerned that maybe my preferences and my needs aren't as important to you as I would hope they would be to my partner, because you've totally thrown out what we were both, what we both had talked about, and you haven't even consulted me really. He just bottles it up and bottles it up and bottles it up until he can't anymore, and he doesn't have the he doesn't feel safe enough to go through with the wedding. And he never says that he wants not to get married to her. What he says is essentially that he's too freaked out and that he tried to get in touch with her. He couldn't because Charlotte's daughter put Carrie's phone in her purse. Obviously, things should never have gotten to that point. But it is kind of confirmation of their dynamic, and the fact that they never resolve either the issues resulting from their dynamic, and the fact that they don't understand how they communicate distress and how they can respond to one another. They also don't address their underlying incompatibility and work out how they might accommodate those differences, which we see as the conflict plays out in the second movie. And I think that for anyone who has also watched Mad Men, the example of Betty Draper, and minor spoiler alert, that after she divorces Dawn and she gets married to Henry Francis, we see the opposite of what we see with Carrie and Big. So we see these people who, Betty and Carrie, who are desperately wanting their relationship partner to be more present with them and to give them more access to their lives. We see that when Betty gets it, she is really happy with her relationship. Obviously, there's a whole host of other issues that continue in her second marriage. But there's one scene in particular, where she's home with Henry and the kids, and they're listening to music and they're reading together, and she's obviously very content now that she has that thing that she thought she wanted and that she tried to get with Don, and that he refused to, he was unable to give her, and that she is able to get with Henry. So while while he's sexist in his feeling that she shouldn't have any opinions, and there are a lot of other things to take issue with in their dynamic, he is present and he's reliable, and they have shared interests in terms of how they like to spend their time. They both want this kind of home life. And we see with Carrie that when she says that what she wants is literally, she says that she wants Big to stand still with her. And when he tries to do just that, he wants to stay home and hang out with her in their shared home. She is upset because she wants them to be going out more. There's another way of interpreting that, which might be that when he's home and they're both home and they're sharing space, that's all they're sharing, and he's not. He's still unable to be emotionally, in terms of his attention, available to her in the way that she's hoping. But it might also be the case that Carrie really likes going out, and she says in that second movie that they've already ordered in twice that week, which means that she thinks staying in 2 out of 7 days of the week is too much time in. Whereas Big seems to really relish his time at home, and to be hoping that his partner is would want to spend that time with him in their shared home. I hope that you've enjoyed this alternative take on what happened between Carrie and the two primary partners that we see in her life, and that you come back for more videos that I'll be posting in the future. Please let me know in the comments about any dynamics in TV or film, or even maybe historical figures that you would like an analysis of. Thanks so much. Nice to meet you. Bye.